Hello and thanks for tuning in to what will be a very unique video on this channel. So far I've sort of reviewed nature books, but in this video I'm going to be talking about my travels to Costa Rica. I was in Costa Rica for nearly a month earlier in the spring, and I did consider how best to do this video. I did consider doing vlogs whilst I was out there, but considering how tired I was whilst I had free time in the evenings, you guys would have been looking at a zombie for the most part of this video. So I think now that I'm back, now is the best time to do this video. So I'm going to be talking about where I went, the landscapes, the climate, the people, the food, and of course the wildlife, because it was the wildlife why I went to Costa Rica. It was the main thing that really attracted me to go to that country. So yeah, let's get started. So just some context before we really get underway. I wouldn't describe myself as a traveller at all. I hadn't actually left Europe until January 2020. Whilst I was in university, I had the opportunity to go on a field trip abroad, and there were many choices that I could have picked from. So there was a trip to Borneo, one to Alaska, one to Galapagos, and one for Costa Rica. And I decided Costa Rica because I didn't know too much about the country, but I think I'd heard how biodiverse that country is. So I went on that trip really treating it as like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and really just to have a lot of fun, because it was in third year, and like most people in third year, work's very intense with dissertation and all that. And I really had a great time. The biodiversity I saw there was absolutely fantastic, and it was definitely the highlight of 2020 for me, which isn't really surprising considering what happened only 2 months after I came back. I remember telling myself, I'm happy not to leave Europe really much for the rest of my life, but I wouldn't mind going to Costa Rica one more time, because I was there for 12 days, but I didn't feel like I really saw the country. A lot of the time was spent doing group projects and traveling from one place to another. And so I didn't really see all the wildlife that I really wanted to see. So yeah, it was always at the back of my mind as soon as I came back that I wouldn't mind going back there. But nevertheless, I didn't actually expect to go back there. So it was just by luck that about 18 months later, whilst I was volunteering in Spurn Bird Observatory in Yorkshire, that I ran into a mate, and I'd been working with him on some ecology job earlier in the year. And he told me that him and his mate were going to Costa Rica, and he knew that I really wanted to go. So all of a sudden I was given the opportunity to go on this trip, which was really fantastic news. I did not expect to go back to Costa Rica so soon after my first trip. And there were some hiccups on the way. Unfortunately, he couldn't actually make it to the trip himself because of work reasons, so it was only the two of us instead of the three, but we still had a really fantastic time. So just for those of you who don't know, Costa Rica is in the Americas. It's one of the countries that link North America to South America. And it's quite a small country as well. It's only roughly, I think, about the size of Scotland, which makes its reputation as being one of the most biodiverse countries on Earth even more interesting, in my opinion. So we started off in San Jose, the capital city of Costa Rica. During the first week, we sort of surfed down the mountains, down to the south. And then in the second week, we spent most of the time in the Pacific lowlands, checking out the rainforest there, in the Osa Peninsula as well, before heading up to Carrera along the Pacific coast for about 5-6 days, finishing off then in Arenal before heading back to San Jose and then back home. And this was slightly different to my first trip. My first trip, we started off in the Caribbean lowlands near La Selva, and then going to the mountains around Monteverde, and then down the Pacific coast to the Osa before then heading back to San Jose and going back home. And most of the days were quite intense. Like, I was waking up at like 4 o'clock, 4:30 every morning for about three weeks, and we wouldn't often come back until about 7 o'clock, so there was not a lot of time to like contact mates or anything like that. It was there wasn't much time for that at all, and I don't think I've ever burnt as many calories as well. I think I lost about 10 pounds or so there. There was a lot of walking and a lot of birding and a lot of having fun. So obviously the landscapes were completely different to what we see here in Britain. So a lot of Costa Rica is covered by some really dense and really biodiverse rainforests, and I was really happy to see that so much of the habitat was intact. A lot of it is still primary and secondary forest rather than agriculture. And one of the things I was worried about whilst we were driving about, I was kind of worried that we'd turn a corner and then I'd see a massive gash maybe in the forest, but that wasn't actually the case at all, really. I didn't see too much habitat destruction in the immediate vicinities of where we were, so that was a big plus for me. It looks like Costa Rica really knows the value of its biodiversity and its importance for its own economy. So of course there are many different habitats though within the country. So for the first week we were mainly in cloud forest, which, as its name suggests, you know, we were sort of covered by this mist for a lot of the time of the day. And cloud forest is quite high up the mountain, so because of that, it wasn't actually hot. You know, a lot of the time I was wearing jumpers and even a coat a couple of times, and it would have been the sort of climate that I think a lot of people that really don't like the heat, I think they would really like the cloud forest because it's very temperate. In the Pacific lowlands, it was really hot, really humid. It would get hot about 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. And when I mean hot, I mean high 20s, early 30s, but it was so humid that it would often feel a lot more than that. And even in the shade, it was incredibly hot, but I didn't care at all. Like, I'm not the sort of person that complains about the weather all the time. I really enjoyed it, to be honest. And then when we went up to the north, to Carrera, that habitat's different again. It's very much dry forest. The trees aren't as thick, and there's a lot of grasslands as well. It was quite hot there, but nowhere near as hot as I expected. You know, I'd heard that it had a reputation to be like a furnace, but no, it was roughly the same, maybe early 30s. And yeah, I didn't bother me at all.
Los juegos típicos, calentito y todo eso. Gracias.
So the wildlife in Costa Rica is really special, and this trip was definitely no exception. I saw some fantastic birds on this trip this time around. On my trip in 2020, I saw about 174 species, which was more than I saw in the UK for the rest of 2020. But this time we saw about 450, which is just insane. I don't think I'll ever see 450 species in the UK in my life. I've seen about 320 so far, and I gain like one new species every year or so now. And yeah, it was insane. I'd say most of the biodiversity was in sort of the foothills and in a couple of places in the lowlands. In the mountains, you have flocks of tanagers and hummingbirds, and lots of warblers as well, wintering from their breeding grounds in the United States. So I saw things like black and white warblers, golden-winged warblers, blackberry warblers, quite a lot of them. And it was nice seeing some of these birds because some of them I was familiar with before I went on the trip, as opposed to a lot of the other birds where we were already IDing them on the day, really. There's so many birds that we could have seen that I didn't know all the birds going into Costa Rica, even though I'd been there already. One of the specialities of Costa Rica and of the Americas in general are the manakins, and these were very special birds indeed. I saw a few on the trip in 2020, the red-capped manakin and the blue-crowned manakin, but I was really happy to see some other species this time, particularly the long-tailed manakin and the orange-collared manakin. That was just those birds were just fantastic. In terms of the highlights, I would say that the boat-billed herons that we saw on like day 7 were fantastic. It was one of those birds that I really wanted to see as I, boarded the plane, because it was one of those birds that I failed to see in 2020. They're such strange birds with their really weird beak, and you don't really see them feeding at all during the day. They're mainly nocturnal, and by the size of their eyes, that's not really surprising at all. Costa Rica has also many special species of mammals. So we saw some coatis, which are like some dog, badger, fox sort of amalgamation, and they were really cool. And sometimes we even saw them in small packs as well. And this was a species that I did see on my last trip, but it was really nice seeing them again. I can't get enough of coatis. We also saw some Aguties, which are like tailless rodents. A lot of the time we'd hear some rustling on the forest floor. And they turned out to be them. They were sort of fairly common. But my main highlight were the monkeys. You get 4 species of monkey in Costa Rica, and we did encounter all 4 of them to some extent. We didn't see howler monkeys, but we certainly heard them. They're the incredibly loud noise they make. But I was really happy mainly to see the squirrel monkeys, because I think these are really cute monkeys. I remember seeing some in Newquay Zoo in Cornwall, but it's a completely different experience as you'd expect when you see them in the wild. And I really liked the white-headed capuchins as well. Some of them were really quite fun and playful. We also saw some peccaries, which are like some pigs in the forest, and yeah, sometimes they were walking around in groups as well. And we also saw some bats as well, and generally the bats there were far, far more numerous than what I've ever seen in the UK. When I was walking near some rivers in the dusk, there'd be sort of swarms of them. And I did bring a bat detector with me, and how they work is that they can hear the frequencies that the bats are emitting and then translate it into a sound that we can understand. And as I turned the frequency, there were bats calling at every frequency. That's how numerous and biodiverse they were. There are also a lot of frogs around. My favourite was definitely this black and green one that we first spotted this forest in Carrera, and I thought this was going to be a really rare species, and then we found out that they were all over the place. I didn't mind that at all, because every time I saw them it was a joy. So a lot of them were sort of hopping about, and the lizards as well. Lizards were really common. Some of them were quite nice and colourful. And some of them were quite big as well, and we also saw some iguanas occasionally on the forest floor as well. So for the people of Costa Rica, most of them didn't really speak too much English at all. I definitely remember having a couple of really fun conversations with people who couldn't understand a word I was saying, and I don't speak any Spanish, so I couldn't understand any words that they were saying. But they were generally really friendly people. I made some nice friends whilst I was there. So most live in like bungalows or really sort of short, small buildings. One thing I didn't really see at all, I never saw terrace houses, and I rarely ever saw blocks of flats, or even semi-detached houses. A lot of them are quite small, quite humble, quite rustic houses, and it was kind of cute in a way. Really, it was quite nice, quite different to the houses you see in the UK and much of Europe as well. So a lot of them were sort of surrounded by some metal fences to stop theft. So that's what most of the houses look like, and they kind of look the same throughout the country as well. I didn't go into any areas that were significantly poorer or richer than any other places. It was quite consistent. One thing I was surprised is just how actually few of them I saw in the national parks. A lot of the places where I went, it was really only full of like rich white old people, a lot of them from the States. I was disappointed not to see more locals there, because you'd think that with a population of quite a few million that we would encounter some a few times, but no, we didn't see any. We didn't see any school trips or anything like that, and it would have been nice to see more of them there. In terms of food, most of the meals that I ate were really kind of snacks more than anything else. The trip was so packed that we didn't really have time to stop and eat as often maybe as I'd like, but yeah, no, the food was quite nice enough. The main staple food of Costa Rica is a meal called gallo pinto, which is a mixture of rice and beans and eggs and some cheese of some sort, and I must have had that meal about 15-20 times over the course of the trip. I remember in the last trip I really got kind of sick of the meal, but considering how many calories I was burning every day on this trip, every time I had food it was very welcome, so yeah, I wasn't complaining this time. When we went up to the north of the country, it was definitely more Americanized, and a lot more sort of tourist focused, so there were a lot more restaurants catering to Western people, so I did have some pizzas towards the end, and definitely you could see the American influence by the size of the pizzas. Some of them were huge, and yeah, I couldn't finish some of them, but you know, who doesn't like a nice big pizza? It really was a fun trip looking back at it. I think Costa Rica has really done well in recognising ecotourism as sort of an important part of their economy. It'd be great if more countries could learn from Costa Rica. We see so much destruction and damage in a lot of the tropics in the media at the moment, and have for the last 30 years or so, and it would just be great if we could sort of end that. It was a really optimistic, Costa Rica is a very optimistic country, I think, with its values towards the environment, and yeah, I would recommend it. Obviously jet fuel is really bad for the environment, so I shouldn't really be promoting too many sort of long haul trips, but if you're down for some carbon offsetting and just want to enjoy yourself, then I definitely would recommend Costa Rica. It's a wonderful country, and I hope it stays biodiverse forever.